Hit record
Got it.
and let's share the source sheet. All right, can everyone see the source sheet?
Yeah. I can.
Okay, good. So we are in Parshat Devarim, the final book of the Torah. I think we've spoken in years past. Right? Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe ish Elokim. These are the words that Moshe spoke. So Devarim is unique in that it is primarily Moshe's words. I think last year we looked at some of the different explanations about how it could be Moshe's words when the Torah was given by Hashem, and it should be Hashem's words and not Moshe's words. But also the Medrash notes that the first time that Hashem appears to Moshe, Moshe says to God, right, at the burning bush, what does Moshe say when Hashem says, go tell Paro to let my people go?
He's not a good orator.
Moshe says, Lo ish devarim anochi. I am not a man of words. And so we see the tremendous growth of Moshe, who just 40 years earlier said, I'm not a man of words, to now the final book of the Torah begins with Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words that Moshe spoke. And so if that's not inspiration for all of us to continue to grow and to work on our challenges, I'm not sure what is. But we're going to look at something very, very different tonight. This is one of those rabbit holes that I got sucked into. And again, I have my friend, I don't know if I should say to blame or to thank, Rabbi Kasher. This is based heavily on the chapter in his book on Parshat Devarim. We're going to look at the character of Og. Who's heard of Og?
Melech HaBashan.
Og Melech HaBashan, the king of the Bashan. What do we know about Og?
We conquered him.
He was big.
He was a big, big guy, right? He was one of the giants.
Oh, that's right.
Do we know anything else about Og?
The spies talked about him.
Well, we're going to talk about it, I know, tonight, but it's amazing to actually read that Moshe was afraid of him.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I would be afraid of a giant too if I had to go to battle against a giant. But Moshe was afraid of him. And as we'll see, there's a very, very interesting, rich, complicated midrashic tradition around Og. So let's start off in our parsha. We're in chapter 3, towards the very end of the parsha. So remember, Sefer Devarim is Moshe speaking, right? This is his right? We get to use fancy English words, his valedictory address, as he's preparing, right, for the generation. This is now the second generation that's going to enter into the land. Moshe and almost his entire generation are going to die out in the desert. At this point, most of them have already died. And Moshe is giving them both a musar shmuz. He's rebuking them and helping them to avoid repeating some of the mistakes that the earlier generation made. He's giving them a history lesson. He's getting them both excited to enter the land and I guess to feel connected to their heritage, to their history. And he's also interspersing it with mitzvot and with other significant things. You know, it's a very interesting sefer. There's a lot written about the structure of it and what Moshe is trying to achieve. But so this is, you know, as he's recapping the history, he turns and he says, "Vanefen v'na'al derech habashan." We went on the road toward Bashan. Vayetze Og melech habashan likratenu hu v'chol amo lemilchama edrei. Og, the king of Bashan, came out to meet us, to cut us off, he and his entire nation for war in Edrei. Vayomer Hashem Elai, Al tira oto ki biadcha natati oto ve'et kol amo ve'et kol artzo. God says to me, do not fear him, because I will give him in your hands, him and his entire nation and his land. And you'll defeat him in the exact same way that you defeated Sichon, the king of Emor, who lives in Cheshbon. And God did indeed give Og in our hands, and we fought them until there was no one left. On Yokod et Kol Arav Beitahi, we captured all his cities, everything, etc., etc. And then if we go down to verse 10, which is on your screen, right? Kol arei hamishor v'chol hagilad v'chol habashan ad salcha ve'edrei arei mamlechet Og babashan, right? So we conquered all of these cities, which were the land of Og in Bashan. Kirak Og melech habashan nishar miyetzer harifaim. Only Og, the king of Bashan, remained from the Rifaim. Hine arso eres barzel, his bedstead, his bed is an iron bedstead. He biribat b'nei amon, teisha amot arkav, arba amot rachba, be'amat ish. It is in the city of Rabbah of the Ammonites. It is 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide by the standard cubit. What a weird way to describe the defeat of Og. Why are we hearing anything about his bed? What does that have to do with anything?
Perhaps
His size.
his size.
Okay,
Yeah.
so most people assume it's telling us that the size of his bed was something remarkable, something of note. Well, before we get there, right? Probably the simplest read is what we see in source number 2 from the JPS commentary, an iron bedstead. This may mean that Og's bed was decorated with iron. In the late Bronze Age, when iron was still relatively uncommon, it was used for ceremonial objects, for jewelry, and for decoration. So perhaps it's meant to show us his great wealth. That probably makes the most sense as to why on earth we would care about his bed. But the Rashbam takes it in a very different direction, as we've already alluded to.
Do they have the ability to measure things vertically, or do they only have the ability to measure things horizontally?
Why would they not be able to measure things vertically?
I don't know what kind of measuring tools they had back then.
Well, certainly they measured I mean, in the Mishkan, we have all sorts of measurements of all different directions.
For height, all right.
Yeah. So Hine Arso, his bed. So the Rashbam says that Eres is actually in modern Hebrew also. Does anyone know what the word in modern Hebrew Eres means? Or Irsa? It's a crib. So the Rashbam says, Arisa shel katan kishaya tinok. His crib was this massive size. Okay, when he was a little baby, he had this massive crib. And why was it made out of iron? Lefisha kishaya katan haya chazak meod. When he was a little child, he was very strong. Uvehishtachato haya mishaber eres shel eitz. When he laid down, he would destroy a wooden crib. So it had to be made out of metal so that he wouldn't destroy it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he was born with Marfan syndrome.
I don't know. Could be.
That would make him weak rather than strong. No.
yeah,
that-
you're right.
What syndrome? What did we say?
Marfan's,
Marfan.
isn't that
Lincoln may have had it.
giantism?
Yeah. So that's right. That's what Malcolm Gladwell says was what Goliath had.
Right.
Right. And he says that one of the strong features is people that have that are very nearsighted.
Mhm.
And so he says that's how David was able to defeat him with the slingshot. Right. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I know it made a lot of news when he came up with that theory. But anyway, so we have this tradition that Og is a giant, that he was a giant from a young age. Whether there's a medical explanation for it, I don't know. I don't know if that would explain, as a child, even someone who has giant syndrome, I don't think is born that large. They'd have to grow a little bit. But anyway, so we have this tradition that he's a giant. And this gets played out in the Gemara in Brachot in source number 4. Okay, so I'm going to just present us with a bunch of sources. I still don't know that I have a full way of making sense of it all, but we're going to think it through together after we see some of the evidence. So the Gemara here is commenting on various places where one should recite a bracha for seeing something miraculous or something miraculous happened, and there's special bracha that should be said. So one of these places is Avnei El Gavish, the rocks or the hailstones of El Gavish, which I think is a place. So it gives a few explanations of what exactly these rocks or stones are. And one of the explanations, about halfway through, the English is over here. Maybe it's one line up, but anyway, Evan Shabikesh Og Melech Habashan Lizrok Al Yisrael. So these Avnei El Gabish is the rock that Og wanted to throw on the Jewish people. Gemara Gemirala. So we have this tradition. Amar Machane Yisrael Kama Have. Og, when the Jewish people are about to attack him, or maybe before they come to war with him, he says, how large is their camp? Tlata parse. It's 3 parseings. We'll call it 3 miles. Azil ve'eker tura bar tlata parse ve'ishte alayhu. So what does he do? He goes and he finds a mountain made of rock that's 3 miles wide, and he rips it up. Ikaltinhu. And he wants to throw it onto the Jewish people to destroy them. Azal akar tura bar tlata parse ve'aite areshe ve'aite kuchabrichu ale kamse v'nakvue. So what does Hashem do after Og rips up this mountain from the earth, this massive mountain? God sends some ants or some spiders or some grasshoppers, it's translated here, to eat through the stone. And it winds up carving out a circle in the middle that falls around his head like a necklace. Crazy image, right? Havabayla mishvale. And so he wants to take it off. He can't get it off his head. His head is too wide to get this necklace or whatever, this mountain off of his head. So right there we have a verse. There's some midrashic interpretation of it. So then Shinei Rishayim Shibarta, right? The teeth of the wicked ones you broke. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Ma'adichtiv Shinei Rishayim Shibarta, Al Tikrei Shibarta, Elasher Ribavta, right? Don't read it as the teeth of the wicked that you broke, but rather the teeth of the wicked that you lengthened. And then the story concludes. And this is even more amazing. This maybe you've heard this part. Moshe Kamahava. So we know that Og was a giant. Well, Moshe himself was kind of a big man. How tall was Moshe? He was 10 amot. Shakil Narga bar Asar Amin. What did he do? He took an axe that was 10 cubits long. So he takes an axe that's the full size of his body. Shvar Asar Amin. He jumped up 10 amot. And he strikes Og in his ankle. So Moshe is jumping, right? He's jumping 10 feet. He is 10 feet. He has this axe that's 10 feet. So 30 feet, right? He has to jump up 30 feet just to strike Og in his ankle. And that's how Og dies, according to this Gemara. Very crazy imagery going on here, right? Og is so massive. He rips up this mountain. The mountain winds up on his head. And then that enables Moshe to go and kill him. Okay, so we begin with this crazy image, and Anne said, right, Moshe was afraid of him. I would be afraid. I assume all of us would be afraid if such a person came to war against us. But
What,
Rashi points us in a different direction as to what Moshe was afraid of. He says it wasn't about Og's size. So Rashi comments, right, when God says says to Moshe, Al tira oto. I'm in the wrong page. Al tira oto, don't fear him. V'sichon lo hutzrach lomar al tira oto. But with Sichon, the king that they fought previously in our parsha, there's no need for God to tell Moshe, don't be afraid of Sichon. It's only Og that God has to tell him, don't be afraid of, which we can infer means Moshe was afraid. Ella mityarei haya Moshe. What was Moshe afraid of? That Og had some merits on his, on his scorecard, as it were, because he had helped out Avraham. Shene'emar vayavo hapalit. As it says, the refugee came, and that refugee, Rashi tells us, is Og. So what's this referring to?
the war with the kings?
The war with the kings, the 5 kings against the 4 kings, or as my teacher liked to say, the war of the 5 towns. So we read in Sefer Breshit chapter 14 that there was this war, right? These 5 kings and the 4 kings, and they go to battle with each other. And in the course of the battle, they take Lot, Avraham's nephew. He's still Avram at this point. Avram's nephew as a captive. And the Torah tells us in verse number 13, source number 6, Vayavo hapalit vayaged leAvram ha'ivri v'hushochen be'elonei mamre ha'mori achi eshkol v'achi aner v'hem ba'alei brit Avram. The refugee came and he told Avram the Hebrew, or Avram the Ivri. He was living in Elonei Mamre of Emor, the brother of Eshkol and of Aner, and they had made a covenant already with Avram. Vayishma Avram ki nishba achiv vayarek et chanichav yilidei beito 18 vayirdof adan. Avram hears that his nephew has been taken captive, and he goes to fight to bring Lot back. So this refugee that comes to tell Avram that his nephew is in trouble, Rashi tells us both in our parsha, and if you turn the page in source number 7, Vayavo hapalit lefi pshuto ze Og. According to pshat of the Torah, this is Og. Shepalat min hamilchama, he escaped the war. V'hu shekatuv kirak Og nishar miyeter harifaim, points us back to our parsha. Only Og remained from the Rifaim. So what's problematic with this Rashi?
Quite a long time ago.
Yeah. How does Og live for so long? Right? How does Og, who, from Avram to the generation entering into the land, is, let's see, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef and the tribes, at least one generation of their children, and then Moshe, at least 6 or 7 generations that we have. And Rashi's telling us it's the same Og, it's the same person. So let's actually turn to source number 9, which I think is the richest source discussing this element of Og's, what I call midrashic biography. This is from Breshit Rabbah. Vayavo hapalit, so the refugee came. Reish Lakish Rashem Bar Kapara, hu Og hu palit. So Reish Lakish in the name of Bar Kapara tells us that this refugee is Og. They're one and the same. Vilama nikrashmo Og. Why is he called Og? Sheba umatsa et Avram Yoshev ve'osek b'mitzvat ugot. When he came, he saw that Avraham was busy with the mitzvah of ugot. Right, ugot we translate as cakes, but here it likely means the mitzvah of matzah, right? There's this whole idea that Avram was celebrating Pesach around this time when the angels come to visit him. We're told that, right, he made ugot for them, he made cakes, so maybe that was matzah. Hu lo nitkaven l'shem shamayim. So Og comes, he finds Avram baking matzah, and Og does not have really kosher intentions. He's not acting for the sake of heaven, but rather, what was his intention when he came to Avram? Ella Amar, Avraham ze kunyonhu. Says, this Avram is a vengeful person. I know that he's going to go try to save his nephew. Achshav ani omer lo nishba ben achicha v'hu yotzei l'milchama v'neherag. So I'm going to tell him that his nephew's been taken captive. He's going to go try to save him, and he'll likely be killed in war. Va'ani notel et Sarai ishto, and then I'll be free to take his wife Sarah. Right? Interesting.
Sounds like David, Bathsheba, and Uriah.
Yeah. I was going to say there's also parallels with from the Torah of Avram's life, right? That Paro takes Sarah, wants to take Sarah. Melchizedek wants to take her, right? We have interesting, it's a repeating theme. Okay, so what happens to Og as a result of this plan that he schemes up? Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chayecha schar p'siyotcha ata notel. Right, so God says, okay, Og, you might have had really bad intentions, but nonetheless, you still did something nice. You still did a good mitzvah for Avram by informing him of Lot's plight. So I'm going to give you a reward for all of the psiot, for all of the steps that you took, right, for your running to tell Avraham. And what is the reward for all these steps? She'at ma'arich yamim ba'olam. You're going to live for a very long time. So this might explain how Rashi, the Medrash says that it was the same Og who lived in the time of Avram that's alive in the time of Moshe. V'al shechashavta laharoget et tzadik chayecha she'ataro elef alafim v'ribei revavot mivnei banav. But because you schemed to kill Abraham, I swear that you are going to live to see multitudes and multitudes of his descendants. Ve'ein sofo shel ish lipol ela biyadan, and you're going to fall at their hands. Shene'emar v'yom Hashem elai al tiraki oto biyatcha al tira oto ki biyatcha natati. Right, as Hashem says to Moshe, don't fear, I'm going to give him into your hands. So we know that ultimately Moshe is going to be the one to defeat Og. So Og is both rewarded with a long life, but ultimately it's a punishment because he's going to die after seeing the multitudes of Avraham's descendants. And I just kept the next line in there because it's such a powerful line, and it's one that I've referenced many times before. Right? This is what Avram is referred to as Avram HaIvri. What does it mean to be an Ivri, a Hebrew? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbanan, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Olam Kulo Me'ever Echad, Ruhu Me'ever Echad. Rabbi Yehuda says that the meaning of the word Ivri is that the entire world stood on one side and Avraham stood on the other side. He was a total counterculturist. It's a very, very important lesson to remind ourselves of often. So we have this tradition that Og is the one who informed Avraham of Lot's plight, and as a result, he merits to live a long life, but ultimately dies, and that explains how the two stories can be connected.
Clever.
Any questions or thoughts on any of this?
The whole thing is so incongruous.
Yes,
That
yes,
at
it
the
is.
same time, you've got to accept the fact that here is a being so huge that, as it said, when Moshe tried to fight with him, with all the efforts that he made, he only got up to his ankle. So we are talking about a being who's probably 150, 200 feet high. He would be known throughout that part of the world. And how he can come and just interact with normal people who are 6 and 7 feet high, it's just, I find it just hard to reconcile these two ways.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Lou. And let's keep Lou's question in mind as we continue to work our ways through this, because the question that we're ultimately going to have to contend with is how literally are we supposed to take any of this?
Yeah.
Right? Do we really believe that it's the same Og who is alive hundreds and perhaps thousands of years later? Right? Is it really possible that there was one man who was so tremendous and so huge he could lift up a 3-mile wide mountain?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem so likely. So what are we supposed to do with all of this, and how seriously are we supposed to take it? So, and just to, if you thought this is crazy, look what happens in the next step. Okay, so now we're in source number 10, the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and this is a medrash commenting on the Noach story.
Mm.
Okay, so how many generations was Noach before Abraham?
10?
Uh,
No, is that too many?
20, right?
20, thank you. Yeah.
Right, there was 10 from Noach to the Tower of Babel, and 10 from the Tower of Babel to Avram. So the Medrash here tells us, "Vanimochu kol hayakum sheba'aretz, vayimach kol yakum asher al pnei adama." All living things, everything living on the face of the earth was decayed, was destroyed by the flood. Chutz mi Noach v'chol asher ito b'teva, except for Noach and all that were with him on the ark. Shene'emar, as it says, vayishaer ach Noach v'asher ito b'teva, as it says that only Noach and which was with him on the ark remained. V'chutz me Og melech haBashan, and except for Og, the king of Bashan, he also was not destroyed in the flood. If he wasn't destroyed in the flood, it means he was alive during the flood, right? So now we're going back even, so many generations earlier. Sheyashav lo al eitz echad min hasulamot shel hateva. What did Og do? He sat on one of the rungs of the ladder at the side of the ark. V'nishpa leNoach ulevanav sheyeh lahem eved olam. And he swore to Noach and his children that he would be their eternal servant if they'll save him. Ma'asa Noach, what did Noach do? Nakav chor echad bateva, v'haya moshit lo mizono b'chol yom vayom. He cut a hole in the side of the ark, and through that hole he fed Og, gave Og food every day to eat. V'nishar gam hu shene'emar ki rak Og melech haBashan, and Og survived, as it says, only Og remained. And then it tells us also, chutz me Eretz Yisrael, that the land of Israel also was not destroyed by the floodwaters. Okay, we don't need to get into those details. So Og is alive during the flood of Noach, and for 40 days and 40 nights and all the other days after until the water recedes, he's just sitting there hanging on to the side of the ark, being fed by Noach through a window or through a hole, and promising that he'll be his servant forever. All right, so Lou, you still think we're dealing with a literal interpretation?
I hope not, because it's getting wilder and wilder.
Yeah.
After all, Og is the height of he could probably, the top of his head could probably have been above the highest section of water in the world, covered as it was at the time. So one can read all kind of fantastic interpretations into it.
Yeah. There are those who say that maybe that's a more plausible read rather than hanging on to the side of the ark. That he was so tall that he was just, his head was never submerged below the water. I don't know. I'm not sure which one makes more sense. Okay, so now we have one more, and this isn't, this is not fully Og here, but even earlier, in Parshat Breshit, Vayikli hechel adam larov al pnei adama v'not yildu lahem, when people multiplied and were all over the land and they had daughters, Vayiru b'nei Elokim et benot Adam ki tovot hena. This is a very cryptic passage, very difficult to translate. The b'nei Elokim, which it says here, right? The males among the divine beings, literally the children of God, who saw the daughters of man, that they were beautiful. They took wives from whomever they desired. Vayomer Hashem lo yadun ruchi ba'adam la'olam b'shagam hu basar vayugi yamav 120 shana. So God says, as a result of this, man will not live forever, but his days will be limited to 120. This is where we get the idea that we give someone a bracha that they should live ad 120, that the ideal age to live to is 120. HaNefilim hayu ba'aretz bayamim hahem. The Nephilim were in the land during that time. V'gam achareichen asher yavo b'nei Elokim el benot Adam ve'yaldu lahem hema giburim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth when divine beings cohabited with the human women who bore them offspring. Such were the heroes of old, the men of renown. I don't know how to make sense of this. I don't. But the Targum Yonatan tells us something very interesting. Commenting on the Nephilim. What's the shoresh of Nephilim? What's the root?
Nafal.
Nafal meaning fall.
Yeah. What's it mean, fall?
He fell out.
Falling in behavior, in morals, lack of
I
morality.
like that, but most interpret it as they fell from heaven. They fell out of the skies. Right? So the Targum Yonatan tells us who are the Nephilim. Shamchaze ve'Uziel hinun Nephilim. So it's these two angels we know of from other sources, Shemchazai and Uziel. Hinun Nephilim min Shmaya. They are the ones who fell from heavens, Vahavu ba'ara beyoma ha'inun, and were on the land in those days. One more step in completing our midrashic biography of Og, and that's the Gemara in Nida. Mechdi, well, let me give you the source, sorry. Sichon ve'og, achi havu. Sichon, who is the king of Emor, and Og, the king of Bashan, are brothers. To Amar Mar, Sichon ve'og b'nei Achia bar Shemchaze havu. As we have a teaching, Sichon and Og are the sons of Achia, the son of Shemchazai. Shemchazai is who the Targum Yonatan identifies as one of the Nephilim, one of these heavenly beings. And then the Gemara, we saw this quoted elsewhere, right? Why is it that they were, if they're brothers, why were Bnei Israel only afraid of Og and not of Sichon? And the answer is, right, given here, is because Og had the merit of his interaction with Avraham. Okay, so now we have this completion, perhaps, of the picture of Og. We have many data points, and I want to see if anyone has any idea how to make any sense of it. So what is it that we know? We know, right, we've seen that he was a giant of tremendous size and strength and stature. That's number one. Number two, Moshe was afraid of him. Most assume Moshe was afraid of him because of the interaction that Og had with Avraham. So Og was alive during the days of Avraham. Og is identified as the refugee who tells Avraham that his nephew has been captured. And as a result of whatever scheming he's doing, God says, okay, Og, you're going to live for a very long time, but you're going to live to see all the multitudes of descendants from Avraham, and they're ultimately going to be the ones to kill you. And then we have another tradition that sends him all the way back to the days of the flood of Noah. And he was hanging out on the side of the ark or whatever he was doing to survive the flood. And we have one more source that connects him with this Shem Chaze, an angel, some heavenly body or figure who's around from a very, very, very early time, and who is has some angelic or non-human qualities to it. So what do we make of all this? Anyone have any initial thoughts on what to do with all of this?
I would suggest possibly people try to understand as much as they can. And one of the sources that people have are the explanations and the traditions of the people who are their neighbors and around them.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficulty with some of this is Malachim have no Yetzer Hara. They only do, at least the simplest definitions, they only do what they're commanded to do.
Yeah.
And to assume that some of them escaped from heaven or escaped from wherever in another state of being into this world, and they act on their own, it's odd. It's like looking at a building designed by a brilliant architect, and has tiny little servants running around in the background to even things out and to make everything balance and balance. It's a folklore approach to explaining all kinds of phenomena. And I find it hard to fit together with the system of halacha, which is very concrete and very specific as to what and when and where. But it provides a great story and provides sort of a literary approach to things, at least that I'm thinking out loud and trying to understand.
Yeah, it certainly is. Back to Lou's point, it's very hard to take these data points at face value. There must be something, some message going on. I'm still not sure exactly what that message is supposed to be. And right, it does tie into to other legends and other, it's not other traditions have similar types of legends, but I'm still not sure what the ultimate message or significance is for us. Anne, was that your hand I saw?
Yes, Rabbi. My teacher, my professor was so interested in oral tradition. Okay, so there are aspects of this that are very similar in oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So we're used perhaps to appreciating a particular Hebrew word because we can give it a couple of different roots and or similar words, and the Midrash is full of them, right? But the other thing is that there are things that are remembered, and don't forget it's Moshe who wrote down the story of Og in both places, or Joshua or somebody, he did both of them.
Mm-hmm.
One looks at the Babylonian tradition of the flood, and then one suddenly realizes, just a minute, there was a version earlier than that, an Akkadian version, and there's a Sumerian version of the flood story. Now we're really getting back into the 3000s. There's even a Hittite version of the flood story. And there are creatures that inhabit that and other of these stories that are quite wondrous in very strange ways. So as Robert was saying, it has this feeling of folklore about it. I mean, we come from the upper woods in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and boy, we've got stories about lumberjacks. You wouldn't know.
The story of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
To use the example of somebody with an axe, jumping up on somebody, I kept thinking of lumberjacks when I was reading it. There are statues in places in Minnesota and of these enormous people, and, or the lumberjacks and all that, Well, what is this all about? Well, they have a lot of different functions, as you can imagine, in societies. But it's an attempt to interweave it.
I just saw him on
Go ahead, Ann.
To interweave it with a system of values, a different system of values than perhaps others have had,
So,
and trying to make sense of it. So we see it in that form, you know.
so it's kind of like a comparative, not literature, but anthropology type of thing that
Yeah, oh
somehow.
yeah. And there are plenty of stories of even between the different African tribes themselves, of certain tribes that are just enormously large. And
Mhm.
if one is the kind of person who thinks that perhaps some of the earliest human beings came out of the very, very inner jungles of Africa, which I tend to think is very interesting, and all along the valley that cuts all the way down from Mount Carmel down all the way down into Africa, the Olduvai Gorge and Olduvai Gorge, and so on. It's just remarkable because they were so small. I've been watching a lot of paleo and archaeology.
Yeah,
And stuff.
so what you're suggesting, Ann, is quite interesting and
Yeah,
not necessarily in the university, but certainly in our Orthodox shul, quite controversial.
yeah.
In that you know, I don't think it's necessarily out of bounds, but it's, you know, it certainly is to say that this legend from other world cultures and other mythology, or however we want to label it, is intentionally being brought into the Torah as a way to show, I guess, the supremacy of our tradition over their tradition. Is that how you would take it?
Well, I think you picked up on a really good theme, and I want you to get to it. And so I'm not going to say much more about it, but just one thing. We had this problem before with the spies talking about the people who were in Haaretz that we could not, you know, and that's the meeting point. And I think it's a very good one. And I think you have good ideas about what to make of it. We tend to think of people in the past as greater than ourselves. And how do we express that? Well, we say they lived longer than we did, or they're bigger than we are, or something like that. I mean, you know, there's so many ways these things can be taken. And it is our frustration that we don't really understand exactly what this is about. And I think it's important to be really humble about that. We don't.
Yeah.
We don't understand it.
In other cultures, the giant didn't survive the biblical flood,
Right.
like
Right.
in the
Yeah.
story of Gilgamesh.
That's true.
But I have a question. How do we know that Og's brother was also a giant?
We don't have a tradition other than that, you know, if we're going to assume that these Nephilim, right, this Shem Chazi, who's their grandfather, was a giant, because that's how many people translate the word Nephilim. So then it stands to reason that what they were, that was their family trait, you know, whether they were and it might relate to the next source also, which Anne actually is a nice segue into. So as I said, my friend Rabbi Kasher, who sent me on this rabbit hole, he brings it all together by pointing to the following: when the spies come back with their primarily negative report on the land. So Kalev and Yehoshua try to silence them and convince the people that no, it's not so bad and we can do it. So after Kalev tries to convince the people that the 10 other spies are wrong, the Torah tells us in source number 14, verse 31, Anashim asher alu imo amru lo nuchal alot el haaretz ki chazaku mimenu. The other people who went with Kalev said, we are not able to go to the land and conquer it because they're stronger than us. Vayotziu dibat haaretz asher tarota b'nei Yisrael lemor haaretz asher avarnu ba la torota eretz ochelet yoshveahi v'chol ha'am asher ra'inu b'tocha anshe midot. And they spoke badly, they spoke slanderously against the land, and they said the land that we scouted out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and the people that we saw there are people of stature. Visham ra'inu et ha-nifilim. We saw the Nephilim, those same Nephilim we saw referenced in Sefer Breshit. B'nei anak min ha-Nephilim. Sons of giants from the Nephilim. Vanihi be'einenu kachagavim v'chein hayinu be'eineihem. In our own eyes, we looked like grasshoppers. And that is how, I like the translation here, and so we must have looked to them. We felt small and insignificant, and so they saw us as small and insignificant. And this is the point Rabbi Kasher makes so beautifully, I think. It says, these people, whoever, right, whatever nation they're from, may indeed have been people of great stature, but God certainly doesn't think they are unbeatable. To the spies, they're simply giants. More even, they are the legendary Nephilim, the kind of giants that take the daughters of men. But then, when you feel like a tiny insect, every person you come across is a giant. If you feel unworthy, then everyone's going to look like a giant. The persistence of Og in our collective story, then, is a testament to our persistent feeling of smallness. Giants haunt us because we fundamentally do not believe that we are big enough or strong enough to survive. Right? So he says that's the meaning of that crazy story we saw with Og ripping up the mountain and the ants eating it all up and it falling around his neck. Right? Who leads to the downfall of Og? Is an ant, is the tiniest of creatures. Right? So it's sending a message that you're wrong to see Og as this unbeatable giant. You're absolutely wrong. He can totally be defeated by even the smallest. As long as, because the ants know what they have a purpose. They're confident in themselves. Right? And then if we look in source number 16, this is the Rambam, right? Not someone who we generally associate with these fanciful midrashic explanations of stuff, but he seems to take this this tradition of Og pretty seriously. And he quotes the pasuk we saw about his bed. And he says it must mean that Og was really, really huge. Right? If the bed of Og was 9 cubits in length, he must, according to this proportion, have been 6 cubits high or a little more. The words by the cubit of man mean by the measure of an ordinary man, not by the measure of Og, for men have the limbs in certain proportions. Okay, he was huge. Og was double as long as an ordinary person or a little less. This is undoubtedly an exceptional height among men, but not quite impossible. So he makes a diuk in the Rambam. He says, yes, Og was big, but he wasn't inhuman. That confusion has been with us from the start. All the stories we've seen have this element of uncertainty. Is Og human or not? Is he righteous or evil? Friend or enemy? We remain suspicious, nervous, wary of everyone around us. We are always worried that the giant will come back. But the truth is, we are not really afraid of how big the giant is. We are afraid, have always been afraid of how small we are. And so the lesson to us then, if Rabbi Kasher is correct, and I'm still not sure that I totally feel that I understand or have a good grasp on this, but I think it's a very beautiful lesson to us, is that, right, the message and the presence of Og, and the reason why we have all these fanciful stories, is that we are supposed to hold ourselves in comparison to him, not a comparison that we're inadequate and weak and small, but in comparison that we should not see ourselves. If we see ourselves as small and weak and inconsequential, then we will be that way. But if we're able to, despite the presence and the stature of Og, see ourselves as worthy and as capable, then that's how we'll be, right? And ultimately, we were able to defeat Og because we overcame whatever hangups we had with him. So I think that's a beautiful lesson. Again, I love going down and painting these biographies and the midrashic sources. Lou, I don't think we're supposed to take these all literally. But I think that there is deep lessons. I'm sure there's a lot more we could tease out of it. And if anyone has any other suggestions, I'd love to hear it, either now or if you want to take some time to think about it. But we have to always open our eyes to these little textual clues in the Torah that can really turn us on to these tremendous, not only rabbit holes of fun discovery, but also some very powerful, meaningful lessons, I think, as well.
If I may add, Rambam is famous for his advocacy for the Shvil HaZahav, the golden mean, the golden path, the middle of the road, Aristotelian idea that he liked. Neither too much to the left, not to the right. Go straight and narrow. The Jewish people, in some instances, didn't have enough confidence. In other instances, some had a lot. We're about to observe Tisha B'Av, and the Jewish people, the Kanaim, decided that they could take on the Roman Empire. They could deal with the legions of the emperors and so on. And they fought, and they made an impression on the empire, and they lost. And awful destruction. So there's some kind of an issue of humility to be combined with confidence.
Yeah.
To avoid doing some things which are not wise, because we are not the ultimate giants and we don't have the key to everything. It's an amazing drama of adventure, of humanity, of making an attempt to do something. Sometimes it works. There are times when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And this season that we're in is one that makes all this really sensitive.
Yeah, that's a beautiful connecting point. And I see outside it's I'm not sure we're quite at Seit HaKochavim, but it's certainly dark enough outside that Rosh Chodesh has officially begun. And so as we begin these 9 days, that's a really beautiful, powerful way to maybe bring this all together into what we're going through now collectively. Right? That, there are times, one of the lessons here is you have to be able to honestly assess what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. And certainly there were times when great mistakes were made because we thought, or certain elements in our nation thought that we were capable of more than we really were. And whether that's punishment for not doing the right thing, political realities, part of it is, but when you are capable of doing those great things and defeating the enemy, then you have to have the confidence to go forth and do it. So thank you, Robert. Very beautiful.
Rabbi, did you know Rabbi Weingarten?
Rabbi who?
Weingarten.
No, I saw something. He was just Nifter, right?
Yeah, there must have been 1,000 people.
Wow.
Like,
2.5 hours.
he was our dear friend for many.
And he was with Rabbi Shafran, the two of them, it's over at Adas Yeshurun. Rabbi Shafran loved this story because Rabbi Shafran, given the background that he had and experience in the Holocaust and everything, he never, he was vertically challenged, shall we say. He was not that tall.
Yeah.
He loved this story. He would just chuckle over it. The thought that Moshe could take an axe and jump up on Og and defeat him. He thought that was just great. So, that's something Israel does every day, I imagine. But
all right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Next week, we're not going to have a shir on Tuesday evening. As I'll be preparing for Tisha B'Av, and I hope everyone will join us in the shul Wednesday evening for Eicha and keynote. Thursday morning as well. The full schedule will be sent out. Hopefully tomorrow I'll have it all put together. And so no shir next Tuesday evening, but I hope to see everyone in shul for Tisha B'Av Wednesday night. I'm back at camp this Shabbos, and home for the rest of the summer. So I will miss seeing you in shul on Shabbos, but look forward to being back with you next Wednesday evening.
Thank you.
All right.
all
Have
goes
a good
well.
night.
Safe
Thank you.
journey to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.